Welcome back to section 2, and today we're going to talk about autopilot. You see, that's my term for habitual behaviors or thoughts, or even something new that we're going to introduce now, which is the reason that we avoid change. Have you ever noticed that we humans will do almost anything rather than change? I mean, we've all seen our teams dig in like donkeys, and I'm not changing, right? Well, that's actually the result of autopilot. Here's what happens. You see, remember when we talked about our mind with our different programs, right? Well, what happens is our unconscious mind creates patterns, right? We talked about the fact that we create patterns to save energy, right? Because the less we have to process fully, the more cycles we have available to be able to look around and see what's really going on in our world, right? So what happens is we come up with status quo ways of doing things. So maybe it's a process, maybe it's the way we go to work, maybe it's the way we get dressed in the morning, maybe that's what we do in our role or in our responsibility at work. Doesn't matter. We come up with all of these standard ways of doing things. And what happens is when something comes along that's different, that's a delta from what is expected, your unconscious mind sees that as a threat. And what it does is it sees that as a threat, and it triggers a chemical cocktail, which is the exact same chemical cocktail as, you guessed it, fight, flight, or freeze. The same instinct, the same as the instinct for fight or flight. Now, what the smaller dose does is it drives you back to what is safe and known and comfortable, the status quo. And by the way, this reaction is called the status quo bias. All right? So now, status quo bias is the reason that we don't like to change. We don't like to do things differently. We want to be comfortable in what we do, and we create pattern after pattern after pattern. The challenge is that the patterns are boundaries and barriers on our lives. And the patterns generally get to be a little more negative and limiting with our confidence, the scary voices, the, oh, I can't do that, or I can't change. And it stops our growth. Now, status quo bias can also be seen in something called the expert syndrome. The same thing happens with the expert syndrome. So we start out and we go and we say, okay, we know this is how we do sales, and this is how we build a channel, and this is how we market to it, right? So that's our expertise. And we immediately go to our go-to knowns, the way we've always done it, and those become our first answers, but they're not necessarily our best answers, because it could be that there's a whole new way of doing things. There's these superstar ways of doing things, and we will never ever see them, because the expert syndrome will take us to what we know, what's safe and comfortable. If those differences are pushed, we'll see it as a threat, the chemistry happens, and we run right back to the way we've always done it, and we miss the opportunities. All right? So, the bottom line is that status quo is easy for the mind, right? It's easy, and it saves cycles, and that's a good thing. And new is harder. It uses energy. It takes energy. It takes cycles. So your unconscious mind always wants to drive you here rather than driving you here. So you have to get conscious about it. And that's what we're going to talk about now. So how do you start to ditch your autopilot? Well, the first thing you have to do is you have to learn to identify where the status quo bias is in your working, and it is in your life and working. So you know what? Here's the thing. It works throughout our world and throughout our lives. Anytime you feel that or that pressure to not try something or not do something different or not take it on, right? Or to hang on. The other way we do it is we hang on to something and we won't let go, and we're not going to change that, and we grouse about it and we think about it. Anytime you feel that happen, that is status quo bias. So I want you to start to pay attention to the status quo bias that's driving in your world. Now, when you catch it, what I want you to do is bring it into consciousness, because that's catching it. And then I want you to force yourself to shift, to look at least two other options besides what you're refusing to do or what you're hanging on to. Look at two other options. Look for something different, because what that will do is as you start to ask questions and look at other things, Questions open your mind. Statements like, I'm going to do it this way, limit your mind. So start to ask questions, start to look for other options, all right? Every time you feel the status quo, and put that in your journals, find what the status quo biases are that you really hang on to, and put that in your journal, but then start to ask, what if? What if I did this? What if I did it this way? What if I tried this? Open up your mind and look for something besides what you don't want to do, what the change. Look for other changes and look at why you should make the change. Now, the other thing I want you to do is I want you to start working on exercise 3, or number 3, which is in your exercise section for this month. And it's about messing with your mind, all right? Because one of the things we have to do is teach our unconscious mind how it can be more open and flexible. And the way we do that is by teaching it, to accept different things. So I want you to shift and shuffle. And here's what I mean. Shuffle up your desk. Take your monitor, and if it's on the left, put it on the right. If it's on the right, put it on the left. If it's in the center, move it, whatever. Shift everything around. You will be uncomfortable, and your unconscious mind will go, no, and it will feel really bad. Stick with it, and as soon as you get comfortable with it, shift it again, all right? Same thing with your closets. It can be your routines. Take a different way to work every morning. Shuffle up the way you get dressed. Change what you do every morning when you get into work. Shuffle everything that you have set as a pattern in order to get your unconscious mind to learn that it's okay. It's okay. It doesn't have to be just like the pattern is every day. We can be different. We can step outside the box. We can move and change and do things differently all the time. Get your unconscious mind used to that, and then we'll talk about a few other things you can do to ditch the autopilot and step into a dynamic and powerful mindset.